Hello, my name is Ernesto, and I'm going to present you a study that I conducted with Anastasiya Lipnevich that is called an integrative model of feedback elements, a meta-review of feedback models. Allow me to start by the end. This is the model that we reach in our meta-review, and it's called the MISCA model. It stands for Message, Implementation, Students, Context, and Agent. And these 5 elements are the ones that we identify after reviewing the 14 models, the 14 feedback models that we included in our meta review. We also created this other figure, which we consider is really important, and this is the different elements are interconnected. So we explain those interconnections. But before we get into details into the model, let me tell you a little bit more about the background of the study. This was a really long and winding road for us, and for example, we didn't have the meta model when we first submitted the paper. It was the reviewers who recommended us to create a meta model. The review ended up being quite detailed and exhaustive. For that reason, we have to publish the full review into different publications. We have the first one, published in Frontiers in Education and led by Anastasiya, in which we have a more descriptive approach and comparing the models in some elements. And then we have the second part, which is published in Educational Research Review, and is where you will find the meta model and some of the comparison of elements that I will tell you a little bit more about it later. Importantly, both publications are open access and you can download it from the websites of the journals. Let me tell you next a little bit more about how we selected the 14 models. So the first step that we conducted was to do a database search, but this was unsuccessful. So we move on with the next one, which was checking our reference library and see how many models we were able to identify. We concluded that 10 were the main models that we had in our libraries. In the second step, we contrasted with 38 colleagues to which we sent them emails asking them to participate and telling us which feedback models they consider to be existent within the field. Those 29 colleagues mentioned 65 models, including the 10 that we have identified in the previous step. Then in the last step, we included the models identified from Murray 2004 and Sutte 2008 to end up with 67 models that we needed to conceive for inclusion. Knowing that 67 were way too many models, we used 2 criteria to select the ones that we were going to make it at the end. We included 6 models from Murray and Sutte reviews, and then we choose the models that were voted by at least 3 of the experts that we consulted. We end up with a final number of 14 models that I'm going to show you in the next slide. Some of you probably will know most of these models because they are quite popular in the field. Now, let's start telling you a little bit more about what you will find in the first paper. So, in the first part, what you're going to find is only the descriptions, definitions, and some conclusions by comparing some elements of the model. This is how the first part of the first publication looks like. So you're going to find a creative title that is going to summarize the main idea behind that model. Then you will have what we call a created intro. So that will be a paragraph in which we try to compress a lot of information about the model, theoretical framework, and then the description, in which we describe in detail the different models. Then after this, something that is really important is that we have included figures when the original models included them. And some of them were redone and redrawn because they were really old and quite blurry. So it might be interesting that you will find them in a more specific and clear way in our review than even in the original publications. I want to say thank you for Emilian to helping us to redraw these particular figures. After the description of the model and figures, you will start to see and to read about the comparison between the different models. So the first one is comparing how the models cited each other, as to have a clear understanding of how the field has developed. As you can see in this table, obviously the newer models are the ones able to cite more of the previous older models. As you can see that there is quite some cross-citation across the years. Then we focus on analyzing some of the model characteristics. So there is a section in which we compare the model based on the typology and taxonomy, whether they contain a figure, what is the empirical evidence behind the model, and the number of sites. Then, of course, we focus in the aspect of the definition of feedback. This is quite a touchy issue these days in the field. Basically, what we did is we searched in the publications for the definition, and if that publication provided one, we copy-paste it in our review. If the publication did not provide a definition, we asked the authors during our interviews with them whether they would like to provide one. Because what we did also was to interview all the authors that wanted to participate in this project. Some of them were also saying that they were okay with the former definition, nothing needed to be changed, but some others, such as feel we need provide a definition for us, and that was the case for some other authors. So you will find all this information in the first publication. Apart from the definition of feedback, copying and pasting in, what we did is we created an list of elements that can be included in the different definitions. You have it here. So we identify that the different definitions can cover 5 areas. Information, whether feedback is actually providing information to the students, whether feedback it is about closing one gap between the current state of performance and the desired level of performance. The third one would be whether feedback is a process. Fourth one, it is whether feedback includes different agents. And the fifth one is whether the definition includes an aspect on how students process from an internal point of view the feedback. This is probably a quite useful tool for all of you interested into the definitions, but as you can see, there are some aspects that are more repeated in the different definitions than others. Of course, we also provide our own definition based on what we concluded from that comparison. If you want to read it, please pause the video because I will move on with the next slide. After analyzing and comparing all the different evidence on the models, we reached 7 conclusions. And I just want to point out here 2 that I think are particularly important. First, we explain how you could choose the right model and theory for your research or for your teaching practice. And 7th one was to reflect about whether we needed more models or not. But in a way, this question was answered by itself because we created our own model in the second part, in the one published in Educational Research Review. Now, what are you going to find in this second part? We go straight ahead with the comparison, and we started comparing the typologies and taxonomies included in the different 14 models. A taxonomy or typology is how the different authors explain the different elements that the feedback can contain. We identify that the previous model had focused on content, function, and presentation. And we also included in this new typology that we are proposing something called the source. In terms of the first category, the category of content, this is the most explored category among the different typologies and taxonomies that we explore. We are proposing that a combination of verification, balance, load, type of information is the most comprehensive, more detailed, but at the same time the most general, so that we have a balanced way in which we have enough information but not too much that we have an overload. And it is important to consider that we recommend that the content of the feedback is led by the 3 questions posed by John Hattie and Helen Timperley back in 2007. And that would be, where am I going, how am I going, and where to next? The second category that we found in the previous 14 typologies was the function. This was not as popular as content. There were some models mentioning about it. And what we conclude is that we can talk about 3 different functions. The first one, it is the feedback should serve for the increase of learning and performance. Second one is that feedback can aim to create motivation or it can affect affect. And the third one is that the feedback can provide information about self-regulated learning. Then we reach the presentation category, which is one that has been the less explored out of the three that we found in the previous models. Presentation is about how we present the data. And this is something that the field is doing a lot of emphasis in at the moment, because we have a lot of emphasis on how to enhance the students' feedback uptake. So this happens by the way we present feedback and the opportunities we provide for them to enhance that type of feedback. Finally, we are proposing this new category that was not included in any of the previous taxonomies, and it's the one about source. We know that feedback can come from the teacher, the peer, the self, a computer, the task, etc. And we think it's important that we also identify how the different sources can actually influence the feedback and its use. So we end up proposing that, among many other scholars, that the source, that could be the teacher, the peer, or the computer, and also the task itself, when we are implementing this type of sources, the ultimate goal is to have the students to create their own self-feedback. And for that reason, we consider source should be a part of the typologies, and a really important category to consider when implementing feedback. Then we compare the models based on different thematic areas. And after analyzing them in detail, we identify 5. The descriptive one, in which we have models that will describe how feedback works, what is the definition, what are the elements, so kind of the foundations of feedback. The second thematic area will be internal processing, and those will be the models that will focus on how students process the feedback from a cognitive and emotional and affective perspective. The third thematic area is the interactional, and these models focus on how the different agents and also how the interactions can provide and promote feedback in a more productive way. The fourth one is the pedagogical one, and this is where the models focus on how to make a bigger emphasis on our instructional settings as teachers by the use of feedback, and how can feedback be implemented in a way that is more powerful for learning. And the fifth thematic area is those models that focus on how different student characteristics can influence the uptake of feedback. As you can see, we provide a, so to speak, color classification in which the darker models, categories, they indicate that that model makes a higher emphasis in that thematic area, and the lighter gray is that is mentioned but is not so emphasized in that model. There are 2 other figures that I think it could be interesting to mention. That is, we analyze the thematic area of internal processing, and for example, we provide a continuum from feedback-centered models to student-centered models. You can see different examples there. And also this other figure in which we compare the pedagogical continuum of the different models from general model, which establish some kind of philosophical aspects of feedback, to a specific model such as very specific actions limited to control learning situations. And with all this, we actually reach the MISCA model. Again, MISCA has 5 different elements. Allow me to explain a little bit each of them, but we consider the 5 of them to be crucial. So something that we think is key is the message itself. And the message is contained by the feedback model thematic area of description or descriptive and the typology category of content. Here, what we want to emphasize is that what we tell the students, so the feedback information in itself, it is important. It's really crucial that we pay attention to the type of information and the message we are delivering. It doesn't have to be in itself just writing feedback. It could also be spoken feedback, or it could also be, the way we are interacting with the students. But that message is key to understand the effects of feedback. Then we move into the implementation, composed by the internal processing of the thematic areas and the typology category of function. Here, the implementation, the main goal is to understand that the way we present the feedback and ask the students to enhance it, that has a function in itself. And it's really important that we pay attention on how students are using the feedback and processing the feedback. This is a key element to understand whether students use it or not. The third element that we want to emphasize is the context. And here we comprehend the pedagogical thematic area and the presentation typology category. And here the context, the pedagogical context, is key because, as we know, feedback is not enhanced the same way in a classroom with a positive learning climate than in a classroom where the climate is not so positive. So what we do pedagogically and the way we present the feedback and how we as teachers give it into to the students actually makes that context that is key for students to use the feedback. Then we move into the agents, and again I have been already talking about the interactional thematic area and especially about the typology category of source, and we believe it is key that the different agents that we can activate in the classroom to give feedback, they all aim to have opportunities for students to, at the end, create their own feedback, self-feedback. And this is when the student characteristics come in, so the last element. First, the key aspect that we are looking at these days is that it is all about how students receive and use the feedback. And for this, we have to understand that different students, based on their individual characteristics, will enhance and use the feedback and receive the feedback in different ways. They will be affected by aspects such as cognitive ability, prior knowledge, self-regulated learning skills, etc. All the elements, the four previous elements that I was mentioning, the interactions always occur within a task that shapes them. So we have to always pay attention to the type of task we are using when we are providing feedback. So the task that the students are working on, that is key. Lastly, let me tell you that, as I mentioned earlier, we do believe that the model is obviously not static, and there are huge connections, really deep ones, among the different elements. So what we are proposing is that some of those connections are bidirectional, as you can see most of them are, but some of them are unidirectional, such as the one from feedback agents to feedback messages. This is the way that we can understand the complexity of the feedback phenomenon. It is not just about the 5 elements that we identified in our meta review, message, the implementation, the student, the context, and the agents. It is also about how they interact among them. So I want to thank you for your attention. Again, you can find the 2 publications on the journals for open access, but you can also download it from my website if that will be preferred by you. Thank you.